I'm really thrilled this afternoon to be joined by Francesca Hogi, who I met at a conference. I think it was a conference. Is that what
I think that's what we call it.
it was a retreat? It was a conference, but it was a conference on patriotism. And there was a really unique assemblage of people there with a lot of varied backgrounds. And you were there and you are a love coach.
Yes, yes. That was a strange room to find myself in for sure, but I was glad to be there and glad to meet you. But yes, I am a love coach. I help people with love.
And I think one of the things that was interesting about that weekend, and it's the obvious, and we'll get into talking about what you do, who you do it with, but love as a concept is elemental to the human condition. And that's something that you talked about at the retreat. And in the context of patriotism, one of the things I've long said, and I said there that weekend, is that we need a reminder in the country that you can't hate half the people in it and love your country.
Right.
And love, whether it's with patriotism, whether it's at an individual level, is just elemental to everything else in society working. And I just wanted to ask you, when you think about your career track, tell us how you got into doing what you do, how you see it, what you do before we talk about the concept more broadly.
Yeah. In my former career, I was a corporate lawyer, which is not the world's worst job, but it still was something that I knew that was not what I was on the planet to do. It's not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And love is something that I've always been unusually obsessed with. It felt normal to me, but as I got older, I was like, I don't think other people think about love quite as much as I do. And eventually, I mean, this is the very, very short version. Eventually, I wound up discovering a matchmaker named Paul Brunson. And he is a Black man. He had an MBA. He was an investment banker, and he left his career to start a matchmaking business. And I was very inspired. I was like, I'm kind of like him. I saw myself in him. And through just following him, I learned that this was actually an industry, that there were people whose job it was to help other people find love. And that was one of the things that was really important to me in my career pivot, was doing something that was really important, like something that was actually really significantly going to positively impact people's lives. And I was like, well, what's more impactful than love, right? Like, as you said, it's elemental. We're all born knowing how to love. We're all born, I consider us all to be born love geniuses. And then a lot of that gets suppressed through, life and childhood and conditioning and trauma and all those things. But at our core, we all have this drive to love and to be loved. And, once I discovered that I could actually help people really tap into that and to really embody love and not just think of it as, even though I focus on romantic love for people who are listening and you have no idea who I am, I typically work with people who are single, who are looking for healthy relationships that last. That's my typical demographic. But even within that, a lot of people come to me and they're very focused on, I want to get into a relationship. I want to get into a relationship. But then ultimately, what the real key to them actually having that relationship is having a deeper relationship of self-love. So when I started, I was very much about, I'm a matchmaker. I'm just going to introduce everybody to, a great partner, and they're going to fall in love and it's all going to be great. And once I got in it, it was like, oh, wait, there's a lot more to this. And there are a lot more layers that people need to really address in understanding what love even is and how to actually live in love, and start there. And then the relationship you want and all of that becomes inevitable and just an accepted or expected outcome of just moving through the world in a certain way and having that intention of, okay, I do want to co-create a loving relationship with another person.
So I want to talk about all of that, but I want to back up on your career trajectory. And
Yes.
so take us to that moment when you're going into the corporate law firm, you're corporate lawyering and doing the things that corporate lawyers do, and
Yes.
you have your first moment, right? And it's, you have gone to law school, you're a lawyer, you've studied for, you've passed the bar, there you are, and one day this, what was it? Is it a moment of doubt creeps in? When do
Yeah.
you go from first doubt to I can't do this anymore? Gotta change it up, because
Yeah.
I think a lot of people find themselves there.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially a lot of lawyers,
Right.
because too many people go to law school who shouldn't. But for me, it took some time because initially, you're right. I did all the things. I graduated from law school. I passed the bar. I was at this, great firm in New York City, and I was living the dream. I'm like, mid 20s, six-figure salary, town car home every night, and all of these kind of trappings of success that at first you're like, oh wow, I made it, right? But then after a couple of years of that, and a big thing for me was that at my firm, I actually had a very, very good situation because I had one of the most senior partners at the firm who was my mentor, who I did 99% of my work directly with him. And so I was very protected from a lot of the law firm politics and competition because I was just sort of in this special category as, being this person's associate. And he and I had a wonderful relationship. And so I recognized, especially compared to all of my friends who were lawyers and, in other professions as well, I was like, I have a very, very good situation here. And still, I don't want, this is not what I want to do for my life. And when I look at this partner, when I look at all the partners, I don't want their job, right? And this is like when people say, when you look at your boss, like if you don't want your boss's job, then like you might be in the wrong job,
Right.
right? So like I don't want that. So I just have to trust that there's something more for me. So my first time that I left the law, I I left and actually because I was telling I told you the short version, but what I actually had studied undergrad was TV and film production. And so when I first left the law, I started a film production company. And so I moved from New York to LA and I did that for 5 years with a friend of mine from law school, actually. So it was that. And then I went back to the law because I got sucked back in, basically because I needed to make money because I wasn't making any money as as an independent film producer. And that time, and so you asked about like that moment. I had a day and I went back to New York, back in the whole corporate law
Back in
grind,
the town car.
back in the town car, exactly. Back in eating, dinner at my desk and all of that. And I literally, Steve, I walked into the office one morning, and this has not ever happened to me before, and or since, I don't think actually. And it was like somebody was whispering my ear, "You're not supposed to be here." And it was so loud and it was so alarming that I actually had a moment of, and this is, downtown Manhattan, skyscraper. And I had a moment of like, is this my intuition telling me like there's a terrorist attack? I mean, like literally that's where went for a moment. And then I was like, okay, I don't think it's that. I don't think I'm in immediate danger, but I've reached the limit of this. Like
Mhm.
this stage of being like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. So I'm kind of stuck here. It's like, I'm sick of being stuck and it's time for me to figure it out.
And you meet this guy who, as you said, he's a black guy. He's an investment banker, right? And so
Yeah.
there's which I put like in the very, very proximate space, right, to
Yes.
corporate lawyers, right?
Very much.
So
Yeah.
he's walked out of that. He's doing this, and this guy's happy.
Yeah. This
And
guy is happy. He's living his best life. He's really, very passionate about what he does and very successful and all of those things. And so I really saw myself in him. I was like, oh, he, did the whole good school, fancy degree thing, fancy career. And he chose something that seemed crazy. And a lot of people really did think I was I mean, no one, I had one friend who said to me, do you really think, is this really what you want to do? You really think this is a good idea? Everyone else kind of went, matchmaking? Okay. Well, good luck with that, you know? Um, so it takes a lot of courage to do a big pivot, you know, as you know. Um, and
When you told people that you were like, I'm gonna be a matchmaker, were they surprised? Were they like, that's Francesca? That were, people kind of fall out of their chairs? Are they like, is Francesca always march to the beat of her own drummer on that type of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people in my life just felt like, okay, you know, she marches to the beat of her own drum. This is the thing she's into. I guess now, you know, I don't think people took it very seriously.
Right.
I also, the other thing that I skipped over is that, you know, I had been on Survivor, right, the show, and I'd been on Survivor twice, and you know, that's a whole debacle. But anyway, but the point is, so I think people were just kind of used to me doing risky things, unorthodox things. And so they were kind of like, all right, well, good luck with that. But there was literally not one person who was like, yes, this is a good idea. I see it. I see the vision. This is what you should do. So I had to really step out on faith that I was being called to this profession for a reason and trust that. But yeah, it wasn't always easy, but I'm glad I
So,
did.
so you talked about this evolution of how you see it, how you counsel people when people come to you, um, that they have to be comfortable with themselves, talking about self-love. But
Yes.
before we get there, let's talk about who's coming to see you. Median age.
I would say the median age is probably late 30s.
Okay. More
Yep.
male or more female?
So I have more women who come to me as clients, but I actually have more men who listen to my podcast, and I find that very interesting. Like the breakdown on social is really 50-50, but I think fewer men are inclined to reach out to a coach and say, you know, I really want to hire you. I need deeper help with this. But yeah, and they might not feel as welcome because I do kind of speak to women mostly, but I include everyone in my heart. Even if people just sort of, you know, I happen to be a heterosexual woman, so I kind of default to that dynamic often, but not to exclude anyone. Everyone's included in what I'm actually talking about, because what I'm actually talking about is really about self-love and intention, and that doesn't have anything to do with your gender or age or race or anything like that.
Now, I find that curious also. How do you account for that, right? What do you think it is with men that they are not inclined to ask for help? That they're lazy, kind of like not action oriented, right? I mean, that's
I mean,
definitely
you
right.
said it. No, I
A
was kidding.
lot of us, right? I mean, that could be it. Like, what do you think? Now, I'm 52, and so we're all a product of our generations. And so being 52, and I say to my kids, well, there's grandpa, quintessential baby boomer, but you missed my grandparents. But grandpa's generation of men were pre-GPS, pre-cell phones, which meant if you were lost with dad, right? And this doesn't matter, right? Black man, white man, Hispanic man, it doesn't, all men of that generation, right? Overwhelmingly, they would not ask for directions, right? You would
Yeah.
drive around in Berkeley for 5-6 hours, right? They would not do it, right? So like men are evolving, right? Somewhat, right? Because they
Somewhat,
were
yes.
zero, right, asking for help, and now people are listening, and men are coming in. But what do you have an approach that's different, off the line, what you say to a client, a man who's coming in late 30s versus a woman, late 30s, how you begin, how you see it?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, well, first of all, I would say late 30s is the median, but the average is probably more like 40s, early to mid 40s. Um, and it's not that I necessarily say different things to, I would say different things to a man versus a woman, but I do speak to them differently.
Mhm.
Meaning, what I do like about working with men is that when a man is motivated enough to work with a coach, he's pretty much like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. So just tell me what to do and I'll do it. So it tends to be a much more straightforward, I don't have to account for as much sort of emotion and like because like the more direct communication, this is such generalizations right now. This is like wild
No, but it's good,
generalizations,
right? But it's
but
good marriage training, like which you'll do what you're told and try to execute it as best you can here, right?
yeah, I mean, there is something about there is something, especially like in this, I think, again, this heterosexual dynamic where there is an element of men want to please you as a woman. So even though I'm just their coach, there's no romantic anything, I'm still saying, like, hey, this is what we agreed to. These are the actions you're going to take. And then if we get on the phone in a week and you haven't done it, and I'm like, well, tell me why you didn't do it. Like this isn't about me. This is about you. So what's going on here? Are you committed or not? It's kind of like, okay, I think that men tend to respond to that a little bit better than women who it tends to be more of a conversation about, okay, let's talk about how you feel and what's coming up for you and how you can like some tools to deal with that emotion so you can take the action that you want. So this men tend to just generally be a little bit more action oriented, but that can have its downside too, obviously, right? And so but that's what's great about a man who's ready to work with a coach. I'm not just saying do these things. It's like there's reason, there's meaning, underneath it, and they're ready for that.
Now, what percentage of people that are coming to see you are divorced, looking, or versus haven't been married yet, haven't had a.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's probably about 50-50, between divorce or even if they weren't married, just maybe long-term relationships, I would say. So I would say it's probably about 50% people who've been in long-term relationships. And then probably about 25% of people who are actively dating, but they're just like stuck in this cycle and they just can't break through. They can't break out of that dating cycle. And then about 25% of people really don't date at all and maybe haven't really dated. And so they're coming to me to really get the confidence and the skills to start to open themselves up and to date and to get romantically activated, as I call it.
Are those people because they just gave up, or they just never engaged in the.
Yeah, it's usually people who never really got started, and then and I by the way, I'm one of those people. So like I mean, I was a lawyer at a law firm and I had to recognize like I don't know how to date and I had to teach myself how to date because I literally was like I don't know how to get a date. Then when I finally figured out how to get a date, I wasn't getting asked on second dates. So I was like my own first client, right? I had to face the kind of the shame that you can feel when you are an adult person who doesn't date and doesn't have relationships because it feels like there's something wrong with you. It's like, why does everybody else figure this out but not me? And so it just happens a lot more it happens a lot more often than people realize. Because oftentimes people who don't date and don't have relationships, they're not talking about it. So you just sort of like, oh, they're busy, they doing this, oh, there are all these other things going on in their lives and that's just not a priority for them, or maybe they just don't talk about it, but people make assumptions that there's something going on that maybe isn't. And so there are these different sort of ways that circumstance can hide in plain sight, but it's actually pretty common.
Now, let me just. Are you seeing same-sex couples? Are they part of the practice? Anyone from the transgender community, or overwhelmingly are we talking about heterosexual practice couples coming?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, I don't work with couples. I work with
Individuals,
individuals.
right?
Yeah. So, and in terms of
Looking
that,
to
I
be
mean,
couples is
yeah,
what
with individuals. So, I mean, in terms of people's like sexual orientation, I mean, most of my clients are heterosexual or at least bisexual. Like there is some heterosexual dynamic there, but I've also had wonderful, amazing clients who are homosexual, who date, it's all sorts of, so I've had like every permutation basically, but my most consistent client is a cisgendered heterosexual woman. That's my most typical client. But everyone, like I said, I've worked with everyone and everyone is welcome. It's just those are the people who are the most drawn to me.
And the people that will go see a coach to do this, any inclination, difference, kind of more white than black, or is it evenly
It's
spread, or
Yeah, it's really evenly spread. And, it's evenly spread for me in terms of my own business. But, and I think, some coaches are a little bit more maybe, like there are a lot of coaches, for instance, who specifically coach Black women. Like there are coaches who specifically coach Jewish people. There are coaches who so there's lots of different, there are people who really specialize in particular communities and demographics. I don't specialize in a particular community or demographic, but that's great. There's lots of coaches out there, and there's basically a coach for everyone. So I think that as soon as people find like, oh, there's somebody who's speaking my language, they're saying something that resonates with me. What I don't see race being a factor in making a decision as to whether or not they're going to work with somebody. It's just who they're going to work with.
are most people college educated, affluent,
Yes.
successful?
Yeah. Yeah. Most of my clients are professionals. And I mean, again, this is not like a requirement that I have, but this is just most of them are people who are more high achieving. A lot of them have graduate degrees. A lot of them have, that successful, what looks like that very successful career. They have some means because it is a luxury service, right? Like, so if you don't have any money to invest in coaching, I still have lots of resources that are free. But in terms of who I work with one-on-one, yeah, there are people who tend to, they have the means to invest in coaching.
All right, so I'm going to make a sweeping kind of generalization now. So we've asked these questions, this kind of archetype of Americans. And one of the things that we were at the conference is, which was a nice thing, able to have direct, honest kind of dialogue and conversations about things. And so we live in this era where everything is sliced and diced into the narrowest band, left-handed, white person, Irish descent, Black, Hispanic, everything else. But what we're talking about really is a segment of the population here that is multicultural, that is diverse racially, is affluent, successful, late 30s to 40s. About half the people have had a failed marriage. My category, now recently remarried, but you have people who haven't been in a relationship, and about 20% that just have this part of their life that's unfilled. Do I basically have that correct?
Yeah, you do. I mean, I think the one thing that I would revise is that the age range is wider, right? Because I
Right.
was giving you medians and averages, but like I've worked with people in their 70s. I have a membership community. I have people in my community who are in their 60s
Sure.
and 50, and so there is definitely a range. But yes, I think that was a good summary. Good listening skills, Steve.
Right. So what I think is a couple of things. I think that we are now beginning to talk more about this as a society. The Surgeon General said that loneliness
Yes.
will kill you off as quickly as smoking a couple of packs a day, which is
Hmm.
quite a statement,
It really is. Yeah, that
right?
report was
Right.
was it was striking. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, so you are this person who they come to see, affluent, successful people, and you are different right away from the overwhelming majority of people who walk in that door, because you walked out of something that made you unhappy, found yourself in a place that made you happy, and really what drives that happiness is helping other people. And part of that advice is telling people that you have to love yourself right?
Yeah.
Before you can commit and to be a full and whole partner to someone else. And so I guess my question is in the context is what percentage of people are walking in to see you in some state of anxiety, some state of loneliness, some state of depression, right? Which is not something, right, that you initially set out, right, to observe, talk about, but take in, but you assess that this loneliness, this disconnection, as driving, this emptiness.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I think there's some degree of anxiety and there's some degree of disconnection for everyone who comes to me. I mean, I think if you didn't have any of that, then you wouldn't be seeking help. You wouldn't be seeking guidance. In terms of depression, there have been times in the past where people have come to me and wanted to hire me, and I actually felt like you actually need. I would recommend therapy at this moment over
Right,
coaching. Because if someone is in a very, if they're just an extreme emotionally, disrupted state, then it's like coaching is that's not the time. You want to stabilize. I mean, I help people with tools with obviously, mental health is something that's part of just what probably any coach does who's a good
right,
coach at least, right? But I'm not a therapist, right?
right.
So if somebody is having an acute mental
Yeah, right.
health
Of course, you
issue,
refer them to the appropriate.
right, exactly. But it's interesting. At the start of the pandemic, my business started booming because, I mean, for a few reasons. One is because people were actually just like sitting down and like actually had time to, really look at their lives and look at their choices and prioritize things differently. But also because people were sad and lonely, and they're like, okay, is there really some way that I can, even given the state of the world, even given my circumstances, is there still a way for me to feel connected and still have love? And yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, if anyone's wondering.
I say this all the time politically, and I know we see eye to eye on, the person I'm going to talk about, but we don't talk enough about in this country about this crisis of loneliness and disconnection as it relates to our politics.
Yeah.
And, what Donald Trump has created, is a community of lonely, disconnected people, and put them together, under this MAGA umbrella. And now that it's the worst cause since Jim Crow in the Confederacy is beside the point, right? If you're lonely and looking for a community, and you have people, right, who have found themselves there, and then on the margins of this, or maybe margins is the wrong word because it's more mainstream than that. Now you have a militant extremism, that's attracting disaffected people, and they wind up in the Proud Boys, and they wind up in the Oath Keepers, and they wind up in the Patriot Front neo-Nazi organization, just like it's always been. And so, this societal issue, right? The healthcare costs of loneliness, the political costs of loneliness, and at the end of the day, the cost of loneliness against, really the mission statement of a country, which is, for people to pursue happiness. It's tough to pursue your happiness if you're sad and you're alone. So most people who come to see you, you would say are in a state of some degree or not of loneliness.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, I wouldn't say that that's how they would describe it. I mean, people don't say, "I'm so lonely, help me." They're more like, "I really want to meet someone. I really want to have a relationship. I want to have love. I want to feel more connected to myself." So I think that's it's not that lonely is the word that they necessarily always use, but there is some loneliness there because if we feel disconnected from love, we're going to feel lonely, whether you are in a relationship or not, right? Like that's just how it goes. Like love is an inside job. and it doesn't feel that way. And and to your larger point about what's happening politically in our country, I don't give Donald Trump that much credit. I mean, he's an avatar. He's somebody who came along, and if the conditions were not perfect for his message and for him to tap into a certain vein, then it wouldn't, it never would have connected, right? So I think that we have disaffected people in every, political shade and spectrum, because ultimately I believe that we have a self-worth crisis in our culture, and that is the cause of everything, because we don't view ourselves as inherently worthy, and we don't view other people as inherently worthy. So what I mean by that is, if you think about a newborn baby and you look at a newborn baby, does this baby deserve love? Do they deserve respect? Do they deserve kindness? Do they deserve safety? Right? So some people would say maybe, depends on what color they are or where they were born, right? Um, but hopefully we can all actually understand that, yeah, this baby, of course, this baby is born deserving of those things, right? And so if you can accept that, then you can also start to understand that that applies to all of us. We were all born, we were all babies once, right? And part of what I see as the problem politically is that um, no one wants to give anyone the basic foundation of just, you are a worthy human. I might disagree with you, but I recognize your inherent worth. And so if we recognize each other's inherent worth, and like even on the basic level of respect, right? Like respect is not something that I believe that we should have to earn from one another. We owe it to each other to just respect each other's humanity. And we don't do that so often on either side of the political spectrum. And so if we continue to just dehumanize each other, it's only a reflection of how we feel. Like if we felt really connected internally and we loved ourselves and we felt inherently worthy and good enough, and we didn't have to do all these things and get this outside validation and approval and all of this, and money and success and all these things to be good enough, if we just felt good enough as we are inherently today, right now, I think the world would be a different place. It would be transformed. So that's how I look at these things. That's why I'm always about, let's talk about how you feel about yourself, because it is such an easy distraction to project and put all of your energy and all of your attention on other people. Look at how terrible they are. Look at how stupid they are. Look at how bad they are. And if everyone in the world just continues to do that, we are actually going to have an apocalypse, and we are all going to kill each other, because that is the inevitable outcome of that energy continuing.
You said one of the things about self-worth that I want to come back to, but so before we come back to self-worth, and I want to ask you a question, which is, why do you think that it is that people's self-worth has never been lower, is what you're saying, at a time when it's constantly validated, right? And the first thing that comes to mind, right, is we inculcate our kids with self-worth now at a young age with participation trophies, right? So there's no lack of validation, right? And I want to go more deeply into this with you, because I think your observation there was brilliant. But how many people, before we do that, how many people say to you, is they're looking for a match, absolutely no one else on the other political party, whatsoever? It doesn't matter. I'll date interracially, I'll date between religions, right, cultures, whatever, but no Republican or no Democrat whatsoever.
I mean, I don't think I have any clients who'd say no Democrats whatsoever. They probably wouldn't be hiring me if they felt that way.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, this has changed, because I've been doing this now for 10 years. And when I first started doing this, people were much more about values and much more about, you know, I don't have to agree on every single political point as my partner, but as long as we have like common ground. And I've definitely seen that polarize. Like people are not interested in navigating common ground anymore. They really just are like, nope, I just want somebody who has the same political views as me. So some people are more extreme in that than others, but I'd say that everybody has a political line in the sand now that's very clear, that probably was a little bit fuzzier. They'd have to give it some more thought, 10 years ago or 8 years ago.
Is it, is it, is it just stable now? Is it just the way it is? Is it still hardening? Is it still getting worse, right? Are more people, more direct and more clear on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's getting worse at the moment, for sure. Yeah, it's getting worse. But the thing about dating culture and just our romantic culture in general is that it's not this thing that's like out there. Like we're all a part of it, right? And so everyone contributes to it. Whether you are actively dating, whether you're in a relationship or not, we're all still collectively contributing our expectations and um, our behaviors and based on certain beliefs about love and relationships. So we all have to decide, wow, this is getting bad. It's only getting worse. And if this continues, what is that going to mean for all of us as a society? What is that going to mean for us as individuals to feel like half of the country is my mortal enemy, right? Like this is not going to be a happy situation for any of us. So it's like the individual. So going back to what you said about self-worth and the validation that a lot of people get. So there's a difference between self-worth and self-val and between self-worth and self-validation or being validated. Because oftentimes, and what happens with a lot of kids is that even by very, very well-intentioned people, we all get this to some degree, your self-worth now becomes tied to the validation. It's not you're good enough. Oh, and that's amazing that you did that thing. It's you did that thing and that's what makes you special and that's what makes you good enough. And so the validation, and that's why we see, does getting a million likes on Instagram help people's mental health? We all know that it doesn't.
I was going to say these things have been a disaster, right? They've been a disaster for this. Do you agree
Yeah.
with that?
I mean, I listen, yes, they have, but but I'm also not, I don't blame it all on technology, but
Sure.
technology definitely exacerbates a lot of behaviors that we see now, the result of this. Like we wouldn't have the loneliness epidemic that we have in our country if we didn't have, iPhones and social media. We wouldn't.
So so I have a good friend of mine. His name is Paul, and I've traveled all around the world with Paul, and we've gone on a lot of whether it's diving, hiking, a lot of things involving guides. And
Yeah.
Paul's dream is to write a book, and in the book he says will be the dumbest question that each guide has been asked. And I think you're in a related field, perhaps,
I love it.
right? That we can talk about dating a little bit and what it's like out there. A lot of people in the warning community might skew a little bit older and aren't necessarily out in the dating world right now. And so we live in a peculiar time, peculiar age, post pandemic. So give us a handle on what's going on out there generically in the dating world, right? Through the prism of, let's say, a guy, right, who comes to see you, in his late 30s, early 40s, he's alone, he's looking for a partner, he wants to find the one. What is it that you're going to say to him? And what is the thing that you most commonly hear, right, from that guy as both a coach now, right, but as a woman, you're just like, oh my God, what is it that they don't get about us?
That's interesting. I mean, I can't say that there's like one specific dumb question, but I think there is a general naivete, let's put it that way, in terms of thinking that um, there's just this formula that you can follow, and you're going to meet somebody and get into a great relationship without having to look at any of your own beliefs, expectations, behaviors. And so I think there's this sense of just like, okay, well, just tell me what to do to like go meet this great person. And it's like, well, I mean, we got to talk first about you, right? Because just going through steps just for the sake of going through steps when you're not aligned with how you actually feel and what you believe, and it's not going to work. So I think it's not that they're dumb questions, it's just more of this sense that maybe there's just this one answer that I haven't heard, and you can just tell me that one thing and I can just do it and not have to worry about anything else. So it's not dumb so much as naive.
Do you keep track of the people that you have, your clients do, how many people say, I've met someone, we're getting
Yeah.
married,
Yeah.
it's you,
Yeah.
because of you.
So you would be surprised. Okay, so I have plenty of people who actively like reach out to me. Invite me to weddings, say like this never would have happened thanks to you. But then I also have people who will just like randomly, like they'll see something I post on Instagram and they'll be like, "Oh, hey, I forgot to tell you, we worked together 3 years ago and you said blah 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 and this was so helpful, and right after that I met this guy and we've been married now for a year." And I'm like, you weren't going to tell me that. Like, you'd be so like that happens so often. It's like people are like, oh, I kind of forgot. Because I think what happens is that it's not like when you're matchmaking and you're the one who's literally like, you know, Jane, meet Steve. And it's like, oh, how did you meet? Francesca introduced us, right? But when it's coaching and you've now developed the skill to become your own matchmaker, you've done it. So it's not like, I think that people sometimes don't they don't make the direct connection.
Have you had some matchmaking horror stories?
Oh God, yes.
Yeah.
There's a reason that I don't matchmake anymore, Steve, because it was not
well, you gotta share one here. Like what? Like
taking
a chemistry
years.
accident got bad. Like what? Like let's hear the word. What is the worst Francesca
the
matchmaking?
the worst is it's not even about disastrous dates. It's about people with absurdly unrealistic expectations. People who I mean, I had to start saying to people when they were telling me, okay, this is why I want to meet somebody. One of my standard questions became, okay, when is the last time you met someone who met this basic criteria? And sometimes it's like, well, I haven't, right? And they're like, well, and then they'll be like, oh, I've met, maybe 12 years ago. Okay, when's the last time you dated somebody who met this basic criteria? And so often people are like, no. And I had this one, I was thinking about her the other day. I had this one client, her criteria was that she wanted to date someone he had to be over 6'3", have blonde hair, green eyes, a minimum of $100,000 cash, like savings on hand, and like some other like super specific things. And I was like, okay, well, I said, blonde hair and green eyes, 6'3". Wow, 6'3", that's already tiny slice of the population. And then you add on top of that blonde hair, green eyes, like, when's the last time you've even seen somebody who met this criteria? And she's like, I haven't, but that's what I hired you for.
If you were like 6'2.5", like what would you have said? But no.
She probably would have been flexible on half an inch, but it's like that kind of delusion of like, you think I have this magical portal where now they're all these like blonde, green-eyed giants who want to date you.
Do you think when that person is sitting in front of you, right? Like that's not real life, is it?
No, well, actually, and what's interesting about this particular, this was interesting about this. So this person really, I learned a lot from this situation. So I never found myself in it again, because what she did was she waited until after she hired me to be honest with me about what she was looking for. So, and she also waited until after she hired me to be honest with me that she'd never been in a relationship before. So so it was like, so there were so many, there were so many things there, but this is actually a perfect example of how love is an inside job. she was convincing herself, I'm single because I haven't met this impossible person. But it's like, no, this is all your way of protecting yourself. This is why you don't date. This is why you've never had relationships, because you create these impossible obstacles within yourself and then you cling to them. And now, and you know, it becomes this whole story and vicious cycle.
Is it a is it a defense mechanism,
Yes.
or is it a I don't know, a type of material, like what percentage of people come in, right, as opposed to I want, right, the blonde haired, green eyed, 6'3" Dolph Lundgren dude, right? Or, like I want like, Michael B. Johnson, right? Like I want somebody who's kind. I want someone who's gentle. I want somebody with character, integrity, hard work, right? I mean, what percentage of people come in and talk about that, right? I can't find somebody with like what we would call the core character virtues,
Mm-hmm.
right? Versus a materialistic, right, aesthetic of, right, I want someone who looks like this, makes this much, and lives here and drives this type of car.
Yeah. Again, I don't matchmake anymore, and this is one of the reasons why. Because with matchmaking, it's probably 80% leading with the superficial list of things that people want. Because they think that if as long as they meet somebody that checks these boxes, then that
I'll be
person will
happy.
they'll be happy. But as
Car
for
service.
coaching, but for coaching, people are more they have more awareness that like, oh, I actually have to do some things differently here. So they typically don't lead with that. It's more about, okay, I know the kind of relationship I want to have. I know how I want to feel. But that's still, I mean, but all of that still comes up. I mean, everyone still has preferences. And some people are more attached to very specific physical or, quantifiable external traits that they can check off a list versus really thinking about the relationship. But it's not their fault because, I just did a TED talk last month in Vancouver, and my
Congratulations.
thank you. And my I
Favorite
did
city in North America.
what's that?
It's my favorite city in North America. I love
Really?
it. Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
it's only my second time there, but it is very beautiful. Yeah. But what I talked about in my TED talk is what I call the fairy tale industrial complex, which is just this web of marketing, advertising, movies, music, so many things that really sell us this notion of romantic love as a fantasy. And it's about finding one perfect person. And when you find that perfect person, you live happily ever after. And this is something that is like literally used to sell us everything, right? Like everything from cars to chewing gum to makeup to everything. It's like if you're beautiful enough, if you're handsome enough, if you look rich enough, if you look this way, if you have these things, then you'll be desirable, then you'll be lovable, then you'll live happily ever after. And this really seeps into people's expectations. So we're all kind of programmed to have this feeling that romantic love is about one perfect person. And if I'm not happy, it's because I haven't found the perfect person. It's because my partner isn't, quote, making me happy. But the reality is, if you are an unhappy person, even if you meet someone amazing, you'll briefly have a bump in your happiness because the novelty of it, and then you'll just default back to your regular level of unhappiness, right? Like wherever you go, there you are. So a big shift that people need to make in thinking about romantic relationships is from not just being focused on the characteristics of another person, but to actually start with, well, what are the qualities, what are the values of the relationship that I want to have? Because if you know that your core romantic values include things like, emotional intimacy, then when you're dating somebody, no matter how, if Dolph Lundgren's your thing, it may be Dolph Lundgren. But if you're like, oh, but I can see that one of my core needs is not being met here. This person is not capable of meeting me at the level of emotional intimacy that I'm seeking, then you understand it's like, well, it's not about them being perfect. It's about what we create when we come together, right? And the relationship is a co-creation. and you're half of that equation. So you have to start with you. Like, well, what am I expecting? What are my values? What do I want? What am I bringing to the table? What are the ways in which I'm not being loving, right? I'm not being loving towards myself. I'm not being loving towards other people. So, I could go on about this. So I'll stop. I could go on and
No,
on.
it's fascinating. I will say this about you as we come to the end of our time. You are an exceptionally interesting person, and you are in this like very, very, very like narrow like band of people, that you meet over the course of life that are just happy and exude a type of glow that makes people feel good. It's a gift and a talent. And I think that when I talk to young people, talk to people on college campuses, we'll talk about careers and the direction they'll go. And, the degree to which anybody hears this, including my own kids, right? This track that you're supposed to be on for whatever reason, to whatever place is highly artificial. And, you're in the town car, you're in the big city, you're on the fast track in the big law firm. And right, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to wind up in a happy and a fulfilled place. And so you get one lap around the track, what you're supposed to do versus what you're called to do, I think are very different things. And, the sooner you figure that out in life, probably the better off you are. And you're a trailblazer in that front. You're helping a lot of people, and you are an incredibly interesting person. And Francesca, before we go, tell us, tell the audience here where they can find you.
Well, first of all, I have to thank you for so many kind words. I really, really appreciate it. I am easy to find. I'm at Dear Franny everywhere. I have a podcast called Dear Franny. Actually, my fifth season launches later this week, so there'll be new episodes coming. But I'm on all the socials at Dear Franny.
Francesca, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Steve. I appreciate it.